In the heart of a bustling city, where skyscrapers pierced the clouds and streets buzzed with life, there existed a courthouse that stood as a symbol of justice. Its grand marble columns and towering archways seemed to whisper stories of fairness and equality. Yet within its walls, biases often lingered like shadows, subtly influencing how people were treated based on their appearance, background, or race. On this particular morning, the courthouse was alive with activity. Lawyers hurried down the corridors, clutching thick folders filled with evidence and legal briefs. Witnesses nervously fidgeted in uncomfortable chairs, waiting for their names to be called. Police officers, clad in crisp uniforms, stood guard, near entrances exchanging casual banter while keeping an eye on the crowd. Among them all, one woman stood out. Not because of her flashy attire or commanding presence, but because of the quiet dignity she exuded. Her name was Evelyn Carter, a black woman in her early 50s with sharp features, warm brown eyes, and an aura of calm confidence. Dressed simply in a navy blue dress paired with a light cardigan, she blended into the sea of faces around her. But Evelyn wasn't just another passerby. She had been summoned to testify in a minor traffic violation case involving her neighbor. Though it was a small matter, Evelyn took her civic duty seriously. She believed deeply in the importance of contributing to the judicial process, no matter how insignificant the issue might seem. As Evelyn entered the courtroom, heads turned instinctively. Some glanced at her briefly before returning to their conversations, while others stared longer than necessary. Their gazes weren't curious or admiring. They were skeptical, even dismissive. To many in the room, Evelyn appeared to be just another civilian dragged into the system, someone whose words would carry little weight. Unbeknownst to them, however, Evelyn carried far more significance than they could ever imagine. The courtroom itself was a blend of formality and chaos. Rows of wooden benches stretched across the space, occupied by spectators eager to witness the drama unfold. At the front sat the judge's bench, elevated high above everyone else, symbolizing authority and impartiality. On either side of the central aisle, tables were arranged for the prosecution and defense teams, littered with papers, pens, and laptops. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and stale coffee, a reminder of long hours spent deliberating over cases big and small. Evelyn found her seat near the back, observing the scene quietly. Around her, snippets of conversation floated through the air. A lawyer muttered under his breath about missing evidence, while a nervous witness wrung her hands anxiously. Nearby, a group of police officers leaned against the wall, chatting casually. They spoke freely, their voices carrying easily in the otherwise hushed environment. One officer, a burly man with close-cropped hair, chuckled loudly at something his colleague said. Another adjusted his belt, glancing around the room with an almost bored expression. When Evelyn caught their gaze, she noticed subtle changes in their demeanor. Their relaxed postures stiffened slightly, their expressions shifting from indifference to thinly veiled judgment. It wasn't overt hostility, at least not yet, but there was an unmistakable undertone of skepticism. These officers, conditioned by societal stereotypes and ingrained prejudices, couldn't help but make assumptions about her based solely on her appearance. In their minds, Evelyn was merely a bystander, someone whose testimony wouldn't hold much value. What they failed to realize was that appearances can be deceiving, and that Evelyn was anything but ordinary. Time ticked away slowly as the proceedings prepared to begin. The judge entered the room, prompting everyone to rise respectfully. Evelyn joined the others, standing tall with her shoulders squared. Her posture conveyed strength and self-assurance, though few paid attention to it. Instead, whispers continued to ripple through the room, focusing on trivial details rather than substance. Someone mentioned how unremarkable Evelyn looked, while another joked about civilians trying too hard to sound important during testimonies. These comments, though seemingly harmless, painted a picture of underlying biases that permeated the very foundation of the justice system. Despite the murmurs swirling around her, Evelyn remained unfazed. Years of navigating challenges and overcoming obstacles had taught her resilience. She knew better than to let ignorance dictate her emotions or actions. Still, she couldn't ignore the sting of being judged so harshly without cause. It wasn't the first time she'd encountered such attitudes, nor would it be the last. But today felt different, perhaps because she had chosen to step forward willingly, ready to contribute to the pursuit of truth. And deep down, she hoped that her presence might challenge some of the preconceived notions held by those around her. As the hearing began, Evelyn listened intently to the opening statements. The prosecutor outlined the case against the defendant, citing traffic violations and reckless driving. The defense countered with arguments about mitigating circumstances and procedural errors. Back and forth they went, weaving a narrative designed to sway the judge's opinion. All the while, Evelyn waited patiently for her turn to speak, knowing that her role, though small, mattered greatly. Finally, the moment arrived. Evelyn was called to the witness stand. As she walked toward it, the room fell silent, except for the soft click of her heels against the tiled floor. Every step felt deliberate, each movement calculated to project confidence. When she reached the stand, she placed her hand on the Bible, reciting the oath in a clear, steady voice. Then, taking her seat, she faced the court with unwavering composure. The prosecutor approached first, asking routine questions about what she had witnessed. Evelyn answered thoughtfully, choosing her words carefully to ensure accuracy. Her tone was calm yet firm, leaving no room for doubt about her sincerity. Despite her professionalism, however, she could feel the weight of scrutiny pressing down on her. Eyes followed her every move, analyzing, judging, dismissing. Some members of the audience scribbled notes while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even the officers who had earlier whispered among themselves now watched her with guarded expressions, unsure of what to make of her. What none of them realized, not yet anyway, was that Evelyn's story was only beginning. Beneath her composed exterior lay layers of complexity, achievements, and experiences that defied the narrow perceptions they had formed. For now, though, she remained focused on fulfilling her role as a witness, determined to deliver her testimony with integrity. Little did anyone know that this unassuming woman would soon reveal herself to be a force to be reckoned with, a figure whose authority transcended titles and whose presence demanded respect. And so, as the trial progressed, the stage was set for an unforgettable lesson in humility, justice, and the power of breaking stereotypes. Evelyn's journey was far from over, and the events that followed would leave an indelible mark on everyone involved. Evelyn's testimony began with a series of straightforward questions from the prosecutor. He asked her to recount the events she had witnessed on the day of the traffic incident involving her neighbor. Evelyn spoke clearly, painting a vivid picture of what she had seen: the screeching tires, the sudden swerve, and the near collision that had sent pedestrians scattering in alarm. Her account was concise yet detailed, leaving no room for ambiguity. Despite the simplicity of her words, there was an undeniable authority in her voice, a quiet confidence that commanded attention. However, not everyone in the courtroom was willing to listen without bias. As Evelyn answered each question, subtle signs of disrespect began to emerge. One officer seated near the back let out a barely audible scoff, shaking his head as if dismissing her credibility outright. Another muttered under his breath, "Here we go again," loud enough for those nearby to hear but soft enough to avoid direct confrontation. These small acts of disdain were like pebbles dropped into a pond, creating ripples of tension throughout the room. The defense attorney, sensing an opportunity to undermine Evelyn, seized the moment during cross-examination. His tone shifted, noticeably, becoming sharper and more confrontational. Rather than focusing on the facts of the case, he began probing Evelyn's character, insinuating that her relationship with the defendant might cloud her judgment. "You've known the accused for years, correct?" he asked, leaning forward with a smug expression. Before Evelyn could respond, he added, "Isn't it possible that your loyalty to him influenced your version of events?" The courtroom fell silent, all eyes turning toward Evelyn. For a brief moment, she seemed to hesitate, not because she doubted herself, but because she recognized the tactic being used against her. It was a classic move designed to discredit witnesses by attacking their motives rather than their testimony. But Evelyn wasn't easily rattled. She met the attorney's gaze steadily, her calm demeanor unshaken. "I have no personal stake in this matter," she replied, her voice firm and measured. "My only interest is ensuring that the truth is told." Her response earned murmurs of approval from some corners of the room, but others remained unconvinced. A few officers exchanged knowing glances, their expressions suggesting they believed Evelyn was simply putting on a show. One, particularly, brash officer leaned over to his colleague and whispered, "She talks a good game, doesn't she? Too bad talking won't change the facts." His comment elicited a chuckle from the group, breaking the solemnity of the proceedings. Evelyn heard the remark but chose not to react visibly. Inside, however, she felt a surge of frustration bubbling beneath the surface. She had faced similar attitudes countless times before, people assuming she lacked the intelligence or authority to speak on matters of importance. Yet here she was, fulfilling her civic duty despite their dismissive behavior. What angered her most wasn't the disrespect itself, but the fact that it stemmed from ignorance. They didn't know her story, her struggles, or her achievements. All they saw was the color of her skin and the modest clothing she wore, and that was enough for them to form judgments. As the questioning continued, the tension in the room grew palpable. The defense attorney pressed harder, attempting to trip Evelyn up with leading questions and hypothetical scenarios. "Are you certain you didn't misinterpret what you saw?" he challenged at one point. "After all, accidents happen quickly. Isn't it possible you missed something crucial?" Evelyn took a deep breath before responding, buying herself a moment to compose her thoughts. "I understand your concern," she said evenly, "but I assure you, my recollection of the events is accurate. I pride myself on paying attention to detail, especially when it comes to matters of public safety." Her words carried a weight that silenced even the skeptics momentarily. There was something about her delivery, her poise, her precision, that made it difficult to doubt her sincerity. Despite her composure, the hostility directed toward her persisted. Some officers continued to exchange snide remarks, their voices low but deliberate. One remarked sarcastically, "Looks like we've got ourselves a legal expert here." Another chimed in, "Yeah, maybe she should quit her day job and join us in court full-time." Their laughter echoed faintly through the otherwise quiet chamber, a stark contrast to the gravity of the situation. What these individuals failed to grasp was that Evelyn's presence in the courtroom wasn't just about testifying, it was symbolic of a larger struggle. Every time she stood up to speak, every time she refused to be intimidated, she was challenging the systemic biases that sought to silence people like her. Her resilience wasn't born out of arrogance or defiance. It was rooted in a deep-seated belief in fairness and equality. She knew that justice couldn't thrive in an environment poisoned by prejudice, and she was determined to do her part to combat it, even if it meant enduring ridicule in the process. Meanwhile, the judge presiding over the case appeared largely indifferent to the growing animosity toward Evelyn. Perhaps he assumed it was harmless banter among colleagues, or maybe he simply didn't want to disrupt the flow of the trial. Whatever the reason, his lack of intervention only emboldened those who harbored negative opinions about Evelyn. They interpreted his silence as tacit approval, reinforcing their belief that their behavior was acceptable. For Evelyn, the experience was both exhausting and infuriating. Each condescending remark, each dismissive glance chipped away at her patience, testing her resolve. Yet she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her crack. Instead, she focused on delivering her testimony with unwavering clarity, refusing to let their attitudes diminish her contribution to the case. As the hearing dragged on, Evelyn found herself reflecting on the broader implications of the day's events. This wasn't the first time she'd encountered such treatment, nor would it be the last. Society often placed unrealistic expectations on Black women, demanding perfection while simultaneously doubting their capabilities. It was a double standard that weighed heavily on her shoulders, yet she bore it with grace and determination. Today, she reminded herself, was another opportunity to prove that stereotypes held no power over her. Unbeknownst to everyone in the courtroom, including Evelyn herself, fate was about to intervene in a way that would alter the course of the trial, and forever change how those present viewed the woman standing at the center of their scrutiny. The seeds of transformation had already been sown, waiting for the right moment to bloom. And when that moment arrived, it would leave an indelible mark on the hearts and minds of everyone involved. The tension in the courtroom was thick enough to cut with a knife. Evelyn Carter sat on the witness stand, her posture as composed as ever, but her mind raced with thoughts of frustration and resolve. She had endured countless dismissive remarks, subtle sneers and outright hostility from some of the officers and even the defense attorney. Yet, she refused to let their behavior shake her focus. Every question thrown at her during cross-examination was met with calm, measured responses that left little room for manipulation or misinterpretation. The defense attorney, sensing he wasn't making much headway in discrediting Evelyn, decided to shift tactics. He began peppering her with rapid-fire questions, hoping to overwhelm her or catch her off guard. "You claim you saw everything clearly," he said sharply, pacing back and forth like a predator circling its prey. "But isn't it true that you were inside your house when this incident occurred? How could you possibly know what happened outside?" Evelyn didn't flinch. She leaned slightly forward, her hands resting gently on the railing of the witness stand. "I was indeed inside my home," she replied evenly, "but I have large windows facing the street. From where I stood, I had a clear view of the entire scene." Her voice carried a tone of quiet authority, one that made it impossible to doubt her sincerity. The attorney pressed further. "And yet, you admit you weren't physically present at the scene. Doesn't that mean your perspective is inherently limited?" His tone dripped with condescension, as if speaking to someone incapable of understanding complex ideas. Evelyn's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, not out of anger, but out of determination. "My perspective may be different," she acknowledged, "but it is no less valid. In fact, having a vantage point from above gave me a broader view of the situation than someone standing on the ground might have had." Her answer drew murmurs of approval from parts of the audience, particularly those who recognized the logic in her reasoning. But the officers seated near the back remained unmoved. One of them muttered loud enough for others to hear, "She thinks she's smarter than all of us." Another snickered, adding, "Maybe she should run for office instead of wasting time here." Evelyn caught the remark but chose not to react outwardly. Inside, however, her patience was wearing thin. The constant barrage of disrespect was exhausting, though she hid it well beneath her composed exterior. She reminded herself why she was there, to ensure justice was served, regardless of how others treated her. Still, the weight of their prejudice felt suffocating, a reminder of the uphill battles she had fought throughout her life. As the questioning dragged on, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew increasingly tense. The prosecutor intervened several times, objecting to the defense attorney's attempts to badger Evelyn. Each objection brought brief moments of relief, but they did little to ease the overall strain. Even the judge, who had been relatively passive until now, seemed to sense the rising hostility. He cleared his throat and addressed the court. "Let us proceed with decorum," he said sternly, casting a pointed glance at the defense attorney. "This is a place of law, not personal attacks." The warning momentarily subdued the defense attorney, but it didn't stop the undercurrent of animosity flowing through the room. Some officers continued whispering among themselves, their comments growing bolder as the trial progressed. One officer leaned over to his colleague and whispered, "Can we wrap this up already? I've got better things to do than listen to this nonsense." His words elicited a round of suppressed laughter, drawing disapproving looks from a few spectators. Evelyn tuned out the distractions as best she could, focusing instead on delivering her testimony with precision. She knew that every word she spoke mattered, not just for the outcome of the case, but also for setting an example of resilience and integrity. When asked about specific details of the traffic violation, she described them with clarity, leaving no room for ambiguity. Her ability to recall events with such accuracy impressed even some skeptics in the room, though they were reluctant to admit it openly. Despite her professionalism, the cumulative effect of the disrespect took its toll. By the time the defense attorney concluded his cross-examination, Evelyn felt drained, not physically but emotionally. The constant need to prove herself, to rise above the biases stacked against her, was mentally exhausting. She longed for the day when her competence would be assumed rather than questioned, when people would see her for who she truly was, instead of relying on stereotypes. Just as the judge prepared to adjourn the session temporarily, a commotion erupted outside the courtroom doors. Raised voices and hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway, causing everyone inside to turn their heads in curiosity. A bailiff rushed into the room, whispering urgently into the judge's ear. The judge listened, intently, his expression shifting from mild annoyance to visible concern. After a brief pause, he addressed the court. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying a note of urgency, "there has been a scheduling error regarding today's hearings. Due to unforeseen circumstances, another matter requiring immediate attention must take precedence. This session will be temporarily suspended while we address the issue." A collective murmur rippled through the courtroom. Spectators exchanged puzzled glances, unsure of what to make of the sudden disruption. Lawyers scrambled to gather their papers while witnesses looked on in confusion. Evelyn rose from the witness stand, smoothing her dress as she prepared to leave. As she walked toward the exit, she couldn't help but notice the same group of officers lingering nearby. They hadn't moved far, still chatting casually as if nothing important had transpired. One officer, emboldened by the chaos, muttered loudly enough for Evelyn to hear, "Good riddance. Maybe next time, they'll pick someone more credible to testify." His comment was followed by a chorus of chuckles from his peers, a final jab meant to belittle her contribution to the proceedings. For a moment, Evelyn considered responding, but something stopped her. Perhaps it was the knowledge that arguing wouldn't change their minds. Or perhaps it was the realization that their ignorance wasn't worth her energy. Instead, she simply exhaled deeply, squared her shoulders, and continued walking toward the door. What none of them realized, however, was that the story was far from over. Outside the courtroom, a senior court official approached Evelyn, speaking softly but with unmistakable urgency. "Madam Chief Justice," he said respectfully, bowing his head slightly, "we need you immediately. There's been a development that requires your presence." The transformation in Evelyn's demeanor was instantaneous. Her previously calm expression shifted into one of quiet authority, radiating confidence and power. Turning back toward the courtroom, she paused briefly, allowing the full impact of her identity to sink in. Then without hesitation she stepped forward, ready to reveal the truth that would shatter every preconceived notion held by those within. As Evelyn re-entered the courtroom, now clad in the black robes of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, gasps filled the air. The same officers who had mocked her moments earlier froze in shock, their smirks vanishing instantly. The room fell silent, save for the sound of Evelyn's steady footsteps as she approached the front. For the first time, everyone present saw her not as a mere civilian but as the embodiment of justice itself, a figure whose wisdom and authority transcended titles and appearances. And in that moment, the tables turned completely. The courtroom, which had been buzzing with murmurs and whispers just moments before, fell into an eerie silence as Evelyn Carter re-entered the room. This time, however, she wasn't the same unassuming woman who had taken the witness stand earlier. Clad in a flowing black robe that seemed to command respect, she carried herself with an air of quiet authority that left no room for doubt about her stature. Her presence was magnetic, drawing every eye in the room toward her as if compelled by an invisible force. As Evelyn stepped forward, the senior court official who had escorted her announced in a clear, booming voice, "All rise for the Honorable Chief Justice Evelyn Carter of the Supreme Court." The words hit the room like a thunderclap, jolting everyone out of their seats, including the judge presiding over the case, who looked utterly bewildered. Gasps echoed throughout the chamber, followed by stunned silence. For several seconds, no one dared to move or speak. All eyes were fixed on Evelyn, whose calm demeanor betrayed none of the drama unfolding around her. Among those most visibly shaken were the officers who had mocked her earlier, their faces turned pale, jaws dropping open in disbelief. One officer, the same man who had muttered sarcastic remarks about her credibility, looked as though he might faint. Another frantically whispered to his colleague, "Is this some kind of joke? That's her?" His voice trembled with panic, mirroring the collective shock rippling through the room. Evelyn wasted no time addressing the court. Standing at the front, she surveyed the crowd with a steady gaze, taking in the sea of astonished expressions. When she finally spoke, her voice was firm yet measured, carrying a weight that demanded attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "I understand there has been confusion regarding my role here today. Allow me to clarify. I came to this courthouse not as the Chief Justice, but as a private citizen fulfilling my civic duty. However, recent developments require my immediate involvement in another matter." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. She paused briefly, allowing the gravity of the situation to sink in. Then, shifting her focus to the officers seated near the back, she added, "Before we proceed, I feel it necessary to address something that transpired during this hearing. It is unfortunate that biases still permeate our justice system, even among those sworn to uphold its principles. Respect should never be conditional. It must extend to all individuals regardless of rank, background, or appearance." The officers squirmed uncomfortably under her piercing gaze. Some avoided eye contact altogether, while others stared at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. Evelyn continued, her tone unwavering. "Comments made during this session have undermined the dignity of this court and the integrity of the judicial process. Such behavior cannot and will not be tolerated. If we are to achieve true justice, we must first rid ourselves of the prejudices that cloud our judgment." Her speech sent ripples of discomfort through the room. Lawyers shifted uneasily in their seats while spectators exchanged nervous glances. Even the judge appeared momentarily flustered, unsure of how to respond to the unexpected turn of events. Evelyn's transformation from a seemingly ordinary witness to the highest-ranking judicial figure in the land had thrown everyone off balance, including those who had dismissed her so carelessly. When she finished speaking, the courtroom remained silent for what felt like an eternity. Finally, the presiding judge cleared his throat and nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said, his voice tinged with both admiration and embarrassment. "We shall ensure that your concerns are addressed promptly." With that, Evelyn turned her attention to the matter at hand, a high-profile case involving constitutional rights that required her expertise. As she took her place at the head of the courtroom, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Gone was the casual chatter and dismissive attitudes. Instead, an aura of reverence settled over the room. Everyone present understood they were now in the presence of someone whose decisions could shape the course of justice for generations to come. For the officers who had ridiculed Evelyn earlier, the realization of their mistake was overwhelming. They sat frozen in their seats, paralyzed by shame and regret. The brash officer who had joked about her leaving the courtroom muttered quietly to himself, "Oh God, what have I done?" His colleague placed a hand on his shoulder, offering silent support but equally consumed by guilt. After the new hearing concluded, Evelyn exited the courtroom, her robes billowing behind her. Outside, she was met by reporters eager to capture her thoughts on the day's events. Rather than focusing on the insults hurled at her, she chose to emphasize the broader lesson. Today serves as a reminder that respect and fairness are cornerstones of our justice system, she told them. No one is above scrutiny, and no one should be dismissed based on superficial judgments. Let us use this moment to reflect and improve. Back inside the courtroom, the officers gathered hesitantly near the exit, debating whether to approach Evelyn. After much deliberation, they decided to take responsibility for their actions. One by one, they approached her, each offering sincere apologies. "Your Honor," the brash officer stammered, his face flushed with remorse. "I am deeply sorry for my behavior earlier. I let my biases get the better of me, and I failed to recognize your greatness. Please forgive me." Evelyn listened patiently, her expression softening slightly. "Apologies are appreciated," she replied gently. "But actions speak louder than words. Use this opportunity to grow, to challenge the stereotypes you hold." Only then can real change occur. Her response struck a chord with the officers, who vowed to rethink their attitudes moving forward. Word of the incident spread quickly, sparking conversations across the nation about implicit bias and systemic discrimination. Evelyn's handling of the situation earned widespread praise, not only for her professionalism, but also for her ability to turn a moment of injustice into an opportunity for education and reflection. By the end of the day, Evelyn Carter had accomplished far more than testifying in a minor traffic violation case. She had reminded everyone present and countless others beyond the courthouse walls that true authority stems not from titles or appearances, but from character and integrity. And sometimes, the most profound lessons come when we least expect them, delivered by those brave enough to confront prejudice head-on. The day's events had left an indelible mark on everyone present in the courtroom. For Evelyn Carter, it was a moment of quiet triumph, not because she had proven her authority to those who doubted her, but because she had used the situation as an opportunity to teach a lesson that transcended titles and appearances. Her actions spoke louder than any words ever could, serving as a powerful reminder of the importance of humility, respect, and self-awareness within the justice system. As Evelyn stepped out of the courthouse into the crisp evening air, she felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her. There was relief, knowing that the ordeal was over. There was pride, not for herself, but for how she had handled the challenges with grace and dignity. And there was sadness, too, an ache born from years of enduring similar biases and prejudices. She knew all too well that this wouldn't be the last time someone underestimated her, based on the color of her skin or their preconceived notions about who she was. But today, she had turned a painful experience into something meaningful, a catalyst for change. Reporters swarmed around her as soon as she exited the building, microphones thrust forward and cameras flashing incessantly. They fired questions at her, eager to capture her thoughts on what had transpired inside the courtroom. Evelyn paused for a moment, taking a deep breath before addressing them. Today, she began, her voice steady and calm, was not about me. It was about the principles we must uphold if we are to achieve true justice. Respect is not earned through titles or robes. It is granted when we treat others fairly, without judgment or bias. Her words resonated deeply, not just with the reporters scribbling furiously in their notebooks, but also with the crowd of onlookers gathered nearby. Many nodded in agreement, moved by her wisdom and poise. Some whispered among themselves, marveling at how Evelyn had transformed a moment of hostility into one of reflection and growth. Others simply watched in silence, absorbing the gravity of her message. Back inside the courthouse, the officers who had mocked Evelyn earlier found themselves grappling with their own emotions. Shame weighed heavily on their shoulders, each man replaying his earlier comments in his mind. The brash officer, the one whose sarcastic remarks had cut deepest, sat slumped in a chair near the entrance, his head buried in his hands. His colleague placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, though he too looked shaken. "We messed up big time," the second officer admitted quietly. "What do we even say now?" Their dilemma was shared by many in the room. Lawyers, clerks, and spectators alike reflected on their roles in perpetuating biases, whether consciously or unconsciously. Conversations erupted spontaneously, ranging from earnest apologies to heated debates about systemic discrimination. One young lawyer approached Evelyn's former seat, staring at it as if it held some secret answer. "How did we miss it?" she wondered aloud. "She walked in here like anyone else, and we treated her like she didn't matter." Word of the incident spread rapidly beyond the courthouse walls. Social media platforms lit up with posts discussing the dramatic turn of events, sparking widespread debate about implicit bias and racial stereotypes. Hashtags like "respect for all" and "justice without bias" trended nationwide, drawing attention to the need for reform within institutions meant to serve everyone equally. Journalists wrote op-eds praising Evelyn's composure and leadership, while activists highlighted her story as evidence of the ongoing struggle against prejudice. In the days that followed, Evelyn became a symbol of resilience and integrity. Invitations poured in from organizations and universities eager to hear her speak about overcoming adversity and promoting equality. Though tempted to accept every offer, she chose instead to focus on her duties as Chief Justice, recognizing that her work extended far beyond a single courtroom. Still, she made time to address the public during a televised interview, using the platform to emphasize the importance of empathy and understanding. When people see someone different from themselves, she explained during the interview, they often make assumptions without realizing it. These assumptions can lead to hurtful behavior, whether intentional or not. My hope is that incidents like the one in the courtroom remind us to pause and reflect, to ask ourselves why we think the way we do, and whether our thoughts align with the values we claim to hold dear. Her message struck a chord with viewers across the country. Calls for training programs aimed at combating implicit bias gained momentum, with law enforcement agencies and judicial bodies pledging to implement reforms. Even lawmakers introduced legislation designed to promote diversity and inclusion within public institutions. Evelyn's courage in confronting prejudice inspired countless individuals to examine their own beliefs and behaviors, fostering a renewed commitment to fairness and equality. For the officers involved, the aftermath was both humbling and transformative. Determined to make amends, they reached out to community leaders and advocacy groups, volunteering their time to educate themselves and others about racial sensitivity. Their efforts were met with mixed reactions. Some praised their willingness to learn, while others remained skeptical, questioning whether genuine change was possible. Despite the criticism, the officers persisted, driven by a desire to honor Evelyn's call for accountability and growth. One particularly poignant moment occurred weeks later when the brash officer visited a local youth center dedicated to empowering underprivileged children. Standing before a group of wide-eyed teenagers, he recounted his experience in the courtroom, admitting his mistakes openly. "I judged someone unfairly," he confessed, his voice trembling with emotion. "And I regret it more than anything. Please don't let my example stop you from believing in yourselves or pursuing your dreams. You deserve respect no matter where you come from or what you look like." His vulnerability touched the hearts of those listening, earning nods of approval and murmurs of encouragement. It wasn't easy for him to bare his soul so publicly, but he understood that real change required action, not just words. By facing his shortcomings head-on, he hoped to inspire others to confront their biases and strive for a better future. As time passed, Evelyn continued to serve as a beacon of hope and inspiration. Her story served as a testament to the power of resilience and the impact one person can have when they refuse to let ignorance define them. Whether presiding over landmark cases or mentoring young professionals, she remained steadfast in her mission to create a world where justice truly knows no boundaries. Years later, when historians looked back on this chapter in history, they would remember Evelyn Carter not only as a trailblazer in the legal field, but also as a champion of humanity. Through her unwavering strength and compassion, she reminded society that respect begins with seeing others for who they truly are and valuing them accordingly. And though challenges undoubtedly lay ahead, Evelyn's legacy ensured that the pursuit of fairness and equality would endure, lighting the path for generations to come.